What is your never interrupt an enemy while they are making a mistake moment? I was doing a mortgage for a French guy in Miami Beach that had a French realtor. Even though both were completely fluent in English, she frequently did asides in French, having no idea I spoke the language. When they settled on a property and we were riding the elevator down from the condo, she told him that, look, these guys are scumbags. And they're going to screw you over, and I have a much better person that you can work with, even though the way foreign investment works is identical throughout the state. Towards the end of the ride, I say to the guy in fluent French that we would be happy to compare our proposal with whatever her people could come up with, and it's his choice, but certainly we would like to work with him on this and any future investments. He starts laughing his ass off. And she was completely mortified. He went with us and fired her as his agent. On the spot. I let the lady who changed lanes into me run her mouth about how I rear-ended her before pulling the cop aside to show him my dashcam footage. When a coworker who I hated got fired a few weeks after I decided to stop fixing his mistakes even if it impacted a client. Years ago I worked extremely hard on preparing a presentation for a tech conference. It would be my first speaking gig. I was nervous AF. I practiced. I refined. I got advice. I practiced some more. My manager was generally a nasty woman, but she was supportive of this. Though she never once saw or heard my presentation. We traveled to Vegas. It turns out there was a far greater demand than they expected. So they moved us to the main stage room. They were expecting about 500 plus walk-ins. I was 10x nervous AF. Well, immediately prior to the start, she noticed a very well-known media person and their photographer sitting in the front row. She got all excited and insisted that she was going to co-deliver it. She even went so far as to put her name on title slide. So, I of course was fuming. We go on stage. She does a decent intro and then I start in. She keeps interrupting, so I just let her run with it. It reminded me of a morning show. A bunch of people, with overwhelmingly fake smiles, talking over each other. This was a deeply technically topic with a live demo. She fumbled each slide worse than the next. And then she got to the live demo slide and froze. I had the wherewithal to let her die. It was gloriously brutal. We had a, let's say, confrontation after. I left within 2 to 3 months. She got fired shortly after. Oh. And the media people she was prancing for left immediately before the start. I think they were just sitting there from the prior session. Perfect. Guy stole a presentation from me. This is 25 years ago. We hated each other. When he started presenting, I realized I had made a huge error. Didn't say anything. Let him get through it. Asked him about the error. He couldn't answer. This was in front of Ku. Got fired. Not for just that. He was an overall douche. This was before everyone was on PCs. Had one printer in one room. Not my story. But several years ago my older brother was fighting for custody of his son with his ex-wife. As the first custody hearing date approached, they were exchanging pleasantries over text, and my brother ended up saying something along the lines of, "I'm not continuing this conversation. I will see you on the 15th. The ex-wife told him, "The hearing is on the 25th, dumbass." So of course, instead of correcting her, my brother just allowed her to keep thinking it was the wrong date. And she missed the first hearing entirely. It became the first of many mistakes she made in the court system that eventually led to my brother and the woman who is now his second wife winning full custody of his son. At my current job, part of my duties is to do trailer audits, make sure people are unloading, loading safely, and I was training a new member for the position to do the job. After a few weeks, it turns out that the other person wasn't doing any aspects of the job. Instead, they were just mingling like it was a cocktail party. When asked why they weren't doing anything, they say it was because they were never trained. Well, turns out that due to past complaints about this particular person, management put them on a PIP. That if they got any type of training, they were to have a piece of paper documenting what kind of training it was, who trained them, and management sign off, with all parties' signatures. When they pulled the file that said they were indeed trained in all duties of the job, they just sat there silent and was fired. They were fired because they pulled the same stunt in every department of the building. And mine was their last chance. Roommate's ex abandons their vehicle in front of my house. I tell them to please move it or I will have it towed. Vehicle suddenly has 2 flat tires. X files police report claiming my roommate and I had slashed their tires. Waited until X made their statement to the police about how we had slashed their tires and that is why they couldn't move his vehicle, and filed a claim against us in small claims court. Provided police and the court copies of my and our neighbor's door cam footage showing the X arriving in the middle of the night to slash their own tires. Cherry on top. X shows up in court wearing the same shirt as in the videos. Edit. Wow, this blew up. Roommate and X had only been dating a few months. X turned out to be a grifter and was dating several people at the same time and using each of them for food, shelter, money, etc. I got involved when my roommate was out of town and the soon-to-be X just sauntered in. Apparently they had learned the code to the garage door. Made themselves a sandwich, showered, slept, etc. I thought my roommate had come home early, but when I texted them they were still out of state. The X left to go out and I changed the garage code. The vehicle wouldn't start, so they just left it there thinking it would be okay. Roommate and a few of the other people the X was dating find out about each other and they all dumped them at once. I asked the X to please move their car or I will have it towed. I give them 2 weeks. Later on I learned that the X was having a mental breakdown and they made some very poor decisions at that point. They broke into some of the other people's houses when they weren't home to do laundry, eat, sleep, and did some other things that got them in trouble with the law but are irrelevant to this story. The X had no proof that anyone had slashed their tires. The cops just came to the door of me and our neighbors to see if there was any footage. There was, and they closed the case. I guess. They never talked to me again about it. The court case was small claims court. The plaintiff has to pay a fee, file a form, have a summons issued to the defendant, and then you both show up in court with your evidence. The X had no evidence other than a long list of real and perceived grievances with my roommate, but no actual proof, so the judge dismissed the case. I never got to show the video evidence to the judge, but I did share it with the clerk on their lunch break, and they were the one who pointed out that the X was wearing the same shirt. I was accused by a neighbor of reversing out my drive and hitting his car. He gave me the date and time I had allegedly done it, and pointed to a small scrape on my car that supposedly matched perfectly the location of the dent on his. This was 7 weeks after the alleged event. By the way, I said it wasn't me but told him to contact his insurance and we'd see what they said. Few weeks later I get a letter from my insurance asking what had happened. To which I responded with the date I had bought my car, and updated my insurance 2 weeks after the supposed bump. He never spoke to me again, but I used to give him a cheery wave every time I saw him glowering at his window. During my very long and exhausting divorce, my ex-husband kept insisting he was ready to settle. We would schedule a conference with my lawyer and then pushed papers around the table for 2 hours. He would just argue over petty details rather than actually discuss anything. This happened a few times. I was incredibly frustrated because I genuinely walked into this wanting to compromise so it would be over quickly. But that was never an option. Note that I hired a lawyer and he did not. He was convinced he could do it on his own better. So after a few rounds of this, I got the impression that he was trying to waste my money until I could no longer retain my lawyer, and then he thought he would have the upper hand. I made less than half of what he did at the time, and my lawyer's retainer fee wiped out my entire savings, so it was a very real concern. My suspicions were confirmed when one day as we were walking out of my lawyer's office, he told me this, word for word, while chuckling. I passed this on to my lawyer, who actually cackled and told me let him. It was then that I learned that we were 6 months out from being married 10 years, and at that point, I would be entitled to a sizable part of his pension upon retirement. She let him play his games for 6 more months without saying a word, and then finally took our case before a judge 5 days after our 10-year anniversary. Not only did I get part of his pension, but she also got the judge to order him to pay almost all of my lawyer's fees. The beauty of it was that it 100% his fault for playing games. Not an enemy, but in retrospect should have been. I work as a teacher and we had an ex-manager guy who decided to get into teaching late. He had lots of pretty horrible habits, eating other people's lunches, perving on the female teachers, squeezing people's shoulders painfully hard as a matey gesture. But the habit that this story is about is how he tried to use weaponized incompetence to get people to do his tasks for him. None of it was really important. He just seemed to enjoy talking people into doing things for him. So he comes up to me one day with a USB data stick in his hand. Apparently it has a copy of a previous year's exam that it was his responsibility to update and edit. He'd taken the file home and his daughter had done the update. Really, dude? Roping family into doing your paid government job for you? Closing parenthesis dot. He wanted me to copy the file from the USB back into the server, replacing the original file he'd copied. It was literally click and drag between the USB and the file server. I flat out refused and said it was part of his responsibility and I was too busy with my own tasks. He proceeds to loudly and publicly proclaim to the entire staff room that I didn't understand how difficult it was for people of his generation to learn computer technology and that I really needed to help him out. That he was currently doing a computer course, but this, dragging a file between two folders, was too difficult for him to sort out. I let him go on for about a good 5 minutes about how horrible I was for not helping the poor helpless old man out. Until I just as loudly asked him, how the hell did you get the original file from the server onto the USB in the first place? You could have heard a pin drop in that staff room. He walked off and copied his own goddamned file. It's so dumb but so fun. Years ago I worked in a cube farm office job and I hated my desk arrangement. It was right in a high traffic pathway, with my back to everyone. Screen facing out so anyone could just sneak up behind me lurking, peer over my shoulder while I worked, etc. Which really just bothers me. I was the first person in my department anyone would encounter. And I was also very good at what I did. So people would just see me first and interrupt me constantly all day. Well, the office got reconfigured, and me and a bunch of other people in that area worked in a big conference room for a couple days during the shuffle. The guy moving around all the cubicle panels was a good friend. So I told him to ping me the minute a back wall desk was finished so I could move my stuff there. He did. And I did. This other guy the first was friends with saw what I was doing and followed me. So we claimed the back two wall desks across from each other. There was a super obnoxious senior developer who figured out way too late what was going on, and got very pissed. Apparently there was some old seating chart, which no one had followed at all as they redid the cube section by section. And it had him on a back wall. So he grabbed his old seating chart printout and marched into the senior VP's office right then and there to complain. I heard him ranting and raving about the chart this and the chart that. He needed to sit in the back to concentrate. Blah blah blah. I just let him monologue for a minute or two because for some reason, he was exceptionally frantic about it. At the absolute perfect time, I got up to go to the break room. And as I walked by I poked my head in the office chuckling innocently and said, "Come on man. Is too busy for this silly stuff. I'll move my desk. Who cares where we sit?" It was like a 5-second TKO. He immediately started stammering about how much he didn't care and how he insisted I just keep my stuff there. So I feigned indifference and said okay. No problem. It was one of my greatest moments in petty office politics. In a meeting with my project manager who has not been in the office or worked a proper full day for months. She has increasingly been annoyed by people bypassing her to get things done by telling me and her other direct reports what to do. I was about to answer a question for stakeholders. She told me to let her speak one sentence and will let me have my bit. I did as I was told. And she told the stakeholder a completely wrong thing about the system we were handling and made a complete fool out of herself. She got sacked this month. An old boss who was awful to me after I took an extra few days of bereavement. She was just not smart, so I emailed her a recap of a meeting we'd had about said days off. She responded not only confirming what she'd said but throwing in a bit of racism. I escalated. I'd been at the company in a different location for 8 years with an outstanding track record, so I had some credibility. 2 to 3 weeks later my team was called into a last-minute meeting where her early retirement was announced and my colleague saw her crying in the parking lot later that day, her last day. Closing parenthesis dot. I really don't hate anyone generally, but that made me so happy, and looking back I still hate her lol. Our friend group had one guy the first had personally cut off because he was a terrible drunk. Another friend of mine was having a cookout and decided to invite the guy the first had cut off despite me saying he was going to do some stupid shit. Fast forward into 2 hours into the cookout. The friend I had cut off from my life got drunk and decided it'd be funny to sucker punch a guy with Asperger's. Everyone was telling him how big of a piece of shit thing that was to do. But he laughed and shrugged and played it off as no big deal. As the Asperger's guy was holding back tears. I didn't have to do a fucking thing. He showed everyone who he was. Everyone stopped fucking with him after that. Good riddance. Preface. I have always done my paperwork in Blue Pilot G2 pen, not shilling. It's a very distinct color and hard to cover. Also, this will be a small novel. At one of my previous jobs I had just gotten my machine-making product ready for packing. The only problem was the outer lip diameter was just too big, think 0.01 of an inch off. Nothing I did could get the diameter down. It was just too hot for the plastic to be formed smaller without cooling the die further. Which was not then possible quality, and my supervisor quibbled about it for a while. It was decided, and hoped, the product would further shrink in storage as it continued to cool and set. So quality tech signed off approving the variants. Several months down the line a couple customers complain lids aren't fitting right sometimes. Later found out only with hot foods or in hot environments. I get called in to the front office for a final warning. A big quality alert. They ended up refunding anyone who bought product made by me. And a copy of the quality paperwork. Quality Tech is saying she never approved me running that product with the quality variants and has a copy of my paperwork, proving it. I waited until everyone spoken their piece. Pulled out my pen. Flipped the write-up over and wrote, "I refuse to sign this write-up because I do not deserve it." I then told them to go pull every quality sheet, every training sign-off, and even my job application and job offer, and notice I write in blue ink. The quality sheet in front of me is a photocopy because all my writing is in black, not blue. Plant manager threw the write-up into the shredder and told me to go home for the day. I had already worked a 12-hour shift before this, and forget about this happening. He did not look amused. There was a new quality tech the next night I went in. TLDR. If you work in any field that requires regular paperwork, use a blue pen. I'm working on a job site and the architect is there one day. I've been given some light fixtures for the sconces in a leasing office lobby. The fixtures are meant to be hung from a ceiling. They can't be installed on a wall. I attempt to convey this to the architect. But he brushes me off and just tells me to follow the prints. I turn to the apprentice and say, "Well, you heard the man. Put them up." A bit later, we hear the crashing of glass. The architect asks what was that? I said, "Your light fixture," as I picked up a broom and dustpan to go clean up. Edit. Told the apprentice to clean it up. Of course. There's a thing in law enforcement, legalese, called a spontaneous utterance. Many people will bury their own cases with these while bitching and moaning at their arresting officer on the way to jail. When I was a teenager, a cousin of mine, Jenny, had a fight with her mom, Jackie. The fight was so intense that Jackie beat Jenny severely. So she called mom and dad asking for help and asked to live here for a while. At the time that sounded horrifying. But we quickly learned that Jenny was full of fucking shit. Jenny was a drama queen. Loved to stir up trouble. Lied constantly about basically everything, and Jackie never laid a hand on her. We had heard rumors but dismissed them and believed her. Until one incident. Mom always kept a few frozen pies in the freezer. Just in case company came over. Jenny took a pie from the freezer one day. Ate the entire damn thing, and when mom came home, she got angry because those pies were for company. She asked Jenny who ate the pie and she said I did. She yells for me. I come into the kitchen. She asks if I ate the pie. I said no, and get yelled at for eating the pie. Jenny then proceeds to launch into telling this overly elaborate tale about how I took the pie and ate it just to get her in trouble. She went on for like 3 minutes and mom just kept getting angrier and angrier at me. While I couldn't help grin like a madman. 3 minutes later she finishes her story and I point something out. It was a coconut cream pie she ate. I despise coconut. I hate it and will never eat it. Mom knew this and the realization hits her. Jenny gets a look of horror in her face. She got grounded for a month. The look of both of them is seared in my mind. Makes me smile when I think of it. The funny thing is, she tried it again 2 months later. This time eating a chocolate cream pie. But mom didn't believe her. Oh boy. This was college drama. My husband still had a year of college to go after I graduated, so I got an apartment in town, but he had his own room with some friends on an on-campus apartment, and after casually asking around, his roommates were cool with me basically living there so long as I helped with chores. Which we found to be a great deal, as my apartment was a tiny goddamn closet with shared bathrooms and kitchen. If I had to share, I wanted it to be with people my own age who I knew. Well, halfway through the year, a roommate moves out to study abroad and one of the other roommate's girlfriend moves in. She seemed nice and the two of us had a lot in common and ended up friends. Or so I thought. A month in, we get confronted by there's been a complaint that involves everyone about my stay. This took absolutely everyone by surprise except the couple. Yeah, they tattled on me to the raw. Never once talked to me. Never brought it up. Meeting happens and the couple are late. They arrive and we start storytelling. The raw's face went from mild disapproval towards me to downright disbelief and annoyance at the girlfriend as she talked herself in circles about how yes, she knew about me before she agreed to move in and was okay with it, but she had feelings, you know? Those feelings? Those vague-ass feelings? She was also paranoid as fuck because the raw flat out asked her if she tried talking to myself or my husband about it and she said no. Absolutely not. Why? She had one experience in the past with a completely unrelated person, so she just couldn't. Because feelings. Her asshat boyfriend just sat there silent, only saying once that he never liked the idea but never spoke up because he didn't want to ruin the apartment vibe, which was ruined by him anyway, so. Yeah. All the while I was perfectly calm and even said it was okay. If they had a problem with the arrangements, I would have happily just stayed in my apartment with my husband visiting. Literally everyone else was telling the raw how completely out of the blue this was. So the raw, who is very fed up with them, tells me that per bylaws I can't actually be in the apartment unless I'm someone's guest. To which the three other roommates immediately say that if my husband isn't home, I can be their guest. One of them is nearly almost always home. The raw agrees. The couple's faces were honestly hilarious. And after that, no one in the apartment liked them. They basically hid in one room for the rest of the year. She did attempt to patch things up with me by gaslighting the whole situation, but I just laughed at her and told her she showed her true colors and I wanted nothing to do with her. She was genuinely shocked. As I was being fired from a job, the district manager requested we record the conversation. He thought I was gonna be very upset. So I obliged. Then when he started to tell me why I was being fired, he started with, "You are gonna be graduating college soon. And we want to make sure we get ahead of you leaving us." I very calmly asked he send me the recording right after he said that. Then later that day I called a lawyer. I now have no student loan debt. Edit. To give context, I was able to win litigation due to breach of contract. I don't feel like the internet is the right place to go into further detail. I used to live in an apartment that had a very old lease. College students basically passed this place's lease down like inheritance until it came to us, and legally, the landlord could only increase the rent yearly by a small fraction of the current lease's rent. The exceptions to this were if the apartment was being renovated, in which case it would be her responsibility to accommodate us while renovating, or if it had been vacant for a year between leases. She knew our lease's rent was extremely low, and so wanted to get rid of us and jack up the rent on a new tenant. She sent us a letter about 2 weeks before our lease would be renewed saying she was renovating and we'd have to leave. Well, it happened my roommate was not just a college student, but a law student, and he happened to know she had to give us a lot more notice than that. So we plainly told her we weren't leaving and she'd be welcome to take us to court. Which she did. She told the judge she wanted to renovate. And the judge asked her for the new floor plan and a cost estimate of the proposed renovation. She had none of those things. When the judge asked why, she said she'd only decided to renovate a week prior. When the judge asked why she'd taken this decision after the legal deadline, 6 months' notice are required to end a lease, she said she was only renovating so she could start a new lease on the property. The judge literally facepalmed at her response, dismissed the case, and renewed our lease with no rent increase for the year, since she hadn't presented us a new one with enough delay to contest it. We were just sitting there with our mouths open, bewildered that she could have been dumb enough to say the quiet part out loud straight to the judge. When I practiced family law, I saw this often on the stand. Turns out if your opponent is crazy most of the time, all you need to do to reveal that is give them a microphone and mildly question their story. The best, however, was in motion to withdraw hearings. For context, I hated these hearings. I dreaded them. I already felt like a failure for having to withdraw from a case, 95% of the time because the client wouldn't pay me. But sometimes because they turned out to be uncooperative and/or combative with me. They were not difficult to win. However, inevitably if I simply asked the client when and how they intended to write their retainer, they'd start listing off excuses about how they don't and never will have the money to do so. It's heartbreaking, but it also proves my point. The clients who were uncooperative, however, were the best. I'd read off a list of times they cursed me out, ignored my advice, and threatened me and my staff. Then just wait. You could watch their blood boil on the stand. Followed by completely unhinged justification as to why no lawyer could reasonably work with this person. Mr. Jones, can you explain why you threatened to shove a phone up my paralegal's ass if she called you again? She calls me every fucking week with another fucking thing that I have to do. You're supposed to be handling my case. It's why I hired you. I don't have time to be searching through my emails and getting bank records and bringing you papers every damn day. And every time my retainer is empty for like a day, she calls to remind me to refill it. I've got other things to pay for. Like the damned child support you put on me when I left. How rude can you be? Right? Right? I swear if I have to hear her damned voice one more fucking time, I'm going to drive over there and slap the shit out of her. Your Honor, I rest my case. I reminded my ex-wife the divorce court was the next day. And was invited to get fucked. So I went by myself. She failed to appear and pissed of the judge so that he asked what would be my desired outcome for assets and custody of the kids. He wrote down whatever I wanted and I could hear her screams when she read the orders from 3,500 kilometers away. My wife was a school teacher with 20 years under her belt. She was paired with a co-teacher for, what we used to call, the special ed students. Wife and co-teacher did not get along. It got to the point where wife and co-teacher, and their respective bosses, were sent to mandated mediation. Near the end of the mediation session, co-teacher asks the mediator, so what's the next step if this doesn't work? Turns out, the next step is the one without tenure gets let go. I was working as a cub reporter in a small town and had done a piece on stray dog menace in some area. Plenty of dogs had attacked kids in a short while. The dog lovers of the town took that piece as a "I hate all dogs" article. They shared it in their WhatsApp group and started talking trash about me. What they did not know was that the admin of the group ran a dog shelter, and a few months back, I had done a piece on the shelter. So I was in the group too. At one point, they began scheming that they'd cook up stories about me lying in the story and complain to the publication. Mind you, these are upstanding citizens, doctors, lawyers, senior executives, so their word had weight against a rookie reporter. I just showed the chat to the editor. He had a good laugh about it. Never knew what happened after that, but hours later, they stopped bitching about me. The admin of the group apologized to me separately. He didn't need to, but never did tell them that I was a part of it. Spez needs no interruption. As a CPS worker at the time, speaking to a father with police present in a case concerning substance use, and the father admitting being high on meth, and thinking the cops were there to arrest his daughter for stealing his meth, admits to me that she stole it because he let her have some. Because if I didn't give it to her, she'd go be a prostitute to get it. Just an entire 45-minute conversation with the guy having no apparent awareness that he had just told a CPS worker and 2 cops that he, 1, is currently high on meth, 2, routinely provides meth to his daughter, 3, has meth in his trailer behind him, 4, his daughter had been at the trailer with him while meth was in the trailer, 5, the meth was stored where she could easily access it, and she knew where it was, 6, he used meth with her. Just unfathomable levels of I'm struggling to believe this conversation is happening. And afraid if I say anything he'll come to his senses and shut up. I was a lead developer in a small company producing IoT devices. My manager hired his friend from his previous company. A guy who was super arrogant and knew everything better. Theoretically, my opinion on the development of the project should be decisive. But neither my manager nor his buddy cared about it. I tried to talk to the manager about the problems with the new colleague, but he brushed me off. The new guy, being so brilliant, was given one important component of the system to do. Of course, he made it clear that he didn't need any help from me. Weeks and months passed. In the meetings, his component was always in the last phase of testing. But I had access to the Git repository. And I saw how messy it was. No one asked me for my opinion. So I didn't say anything. I waited. The deadline has come. The release of the product. And of course nothing works. Higher management became interested in the case. And my manager could only avoid being fired in one way: he fired his buddy. A few weeks later, I left the company. That was over a year ago. And as far as I know, the product still hasn't hit the market. I worked in a country-wide company and needed something done by a peer in another office. She was very uncooperative and was arguing with me that she should not do what I was asking because it was not the correct procedure. It was, in fact, the correct procedure as per my boss, who was her boss's boss. But before I could tell her where I had gotten my instructions, she took it upon herself to send me a very condescending email, CCing her boss and mine. She was clearly trying to put me on the spot for being wrong. I just waited until both her boss and mine told her that I was right. And I was just sitting there thinking, why are you making this so hard on yourself, girl? Woozy face. 10 years ago I had a coworker everyone found pretty annoying. She was an idiot who thought she knew better than everyone else. And would get offended at every opportunity. She took something I said the wrong way one day and got really upset. And I just didn't say anything. I would not indulge her insanity. So she quit, grabbed her stuff and walked out on a job she'd had for years. No one spoke a word to stop her. I was an attorney. Other side sues my client alleging he missed work for FMLA protected reasons. And his termination was wrongful. I look up plaintiff in public records database. And see that he had court dates on all of the days he missed work. Instead of immediately confronting plaintiff to give him time to change his story, I depose plaintiff and have him walk me through every minute of every day he missed work. He leaves out the court part. A month after the deposition, after the time passes when the deposition can be corrected, I send plaintiff's lawyer printouts of the court records with the relevant dates highlighted, along with a paperwork to voluntarily dismiss the case and a letter stating that any further action in the case will result in a motion against him for bad faith litigation. Don't hear a peep from the lawyer. But get the dismissal order from the judge a week later. Not mine obviously, but the Space Shuttle Challenger engineer that knew it would explode. Bob Ebeling. He repeatedly said the cold weather would cause a failure despite pressure from NASA administration. He describes then as making the best decision of his life. Refusing to sign the paper indicating he approves of the launch. Forcing his boss to do it. At the governmental inquiry after the death of the astronauts, NASA said the engineers signed a paper approving the launch that day. Which, yeah, that's true, but worded as deceptively as can be. Bob then stood up, walked to the hearing, said that he personally refused the launch but was overruled to the stunned members of the hearing. The government fired the NASA execs and made Bob head of the investigation. We had a catered lunch at work. There was a sushi platter along with all the usual condiments. My stupid manager, whom I despised very much, slathered her maki roll with wasabi. She looked at me and said, I didn't know sushi was served with guacamole. She then shoved 2 pieces in her mouth simultaneously. Exactly 3 seconds later, she began to sweat profusely and spat out a sludge of half-chewed maki rolls and wasabi. After recovering from the shock, she yelled what kind of guacamole was that, not realizing it was not guacamole at all. My ex-boss was a complete douche in every aspect. We worked as surveyors using drones to scan and survey large areas. And he would go out of his way to get the cheapest and least reliable drones to do the job. One of those drones was this god-awful fixed wing, shaped like a plane with only one propeller, that you launched using this shit slingshot system that had a 50% chance of just launching the thing nose down into the ground. I told him this thing's a piece of shit. I even recorded my launches with it so he could see this thing was a piece of shit. But he insisted I was just a shit pilot who couldn't take off a DJI to save my life. After 3 crashes, 2 rolls of duct tape and a few arguments, He decides to come with to the next big job we have and just do it himself. Now the turnover times for these jobs were insane. The man had zero concept for how long shit takes. So he'd promise the clients the data the very next day. Which meant that everything would have to go perfectly the day of the flight. With zero delays. So I could process the data overnight and have it ready for them the next day. No room for errors. No second chances. Every morning it was make or break. So we get to the site in the early morning. And I'm completely hands-off. Normally I'd pack a second drone for when this one inevitably kamikazes into the earth. But this time, I decide he needs a slice of humble pie. I watch as he sets up the drone. Runs through the checks. Loads it onto that god-awful fucking slingshot and gets ready to pull the trigger. I take a few steps back. Take out my phone to record. And watch the fireworks. He pulled the lever and the bungee cord released. It whipped the drone 10 feet into the air at Mach 2. Before the thing nose-dived right into the ground, breaking off one of the wings. After about 2 seconds of teetering on the ground, the drone's autopilot thought to itself, hey, that was a launch, wasn't it? And automatically kicked the propeller into high gear, shattering it against the cold, unforgiving ground. He just watched the whole thing happen with a dead look in his eyes. Once the drone settled down and the death throes stopped, he picked up the drone, walked back to us, and said, well, shit. The 4-hour drive back to the office was completely silent. And our boss had to call the client and explain why we wouldn't be delivering the data to them on time. We had another job we had to do the next day. So they'd only have it next week. I could hear the client screaming to him over the phone from the next room. Needless to say, we never used that drone again. He never stopped buying shit drones. But when I told him they were shit, he believed me. It was during one of the many times my brother was annoying the shit out of me. He would often bother me until I was literally crying and begging him to stop by walking into my room and screaming, slamming my door, or just putting his trash in my room to pick up. It would go from just getting annoyed and telling him to get out because I was busy or trying to relax to getting worn out by his nonsense to literally having a breakdown because it just won't fucking end and my mom wouldn't do shit about it. Well, one day I was in the middle of another mental breakdown where I was literally just crying curled up in a ball trying to calm down after he threw something at me. And I guess he didn't hear it, but my dad was coming up the stairs as he was about to go back to my room and continue with his daily tormenting. I heard my dad coming up the stairs and just stayed quiet and tried to calm down as my brother started to scream again, laughing his annoying ass off after a few moments when I just covered my ears. After he finished screaming, my dad pulled him out of my room and grounded him right then and there. Gave him a stern talking to. Then made him go downstairs and do a bunch of chores while he calmed me down. That was one of the first time he was caught and stopped, since my dad was always at work and my mom didn't give a fuck, and my dad took it very seriously to the point where every time he caught him doing that again, he would ground him for weeks at a time. And the stuff he got grounded from was pretty damn creative. A former coworker decided to blast profanity at me for having used a company truck typically assigned to him from the night prior. His biggest problem was that I destroyed the seat with my big fat ass. I calmed down as much as I could and called my supervisor, who rushed over and sat us both the company office. With the exception of a few head nods and yes answers, I let my coworker dig himself deeper and deeper. He was a very loud and bombastic character, so it was easy. Supervisor advised him to collect his personal belongings and take a few days off to cool down. He was then fired after 3 days rest. As for the truck seat, I forgot to reset the lumbar support on the seat. I've written about this before, but my half-sister moved in with my ex-husband the day I moved out. They swore they weren't sleeping together. I didn't ask. They told me without prompting. So I saw no reason to tell me ex that my sister had herpes. After all, they said they weren't sleeping together. Guess who was on Valtrex 2 months after the divorce? Tears of joy. So when my ex moved out, they loaded all her stuff in the front of a trailer to move to California. The truck was too long to tow another trailer with her new penis's Ford Mustang. So they loaded it on the back of the trailer and strapped it down. I looked at that in the back of the trailer and thought to myself, they aren't that dumb, are they? But that's on them. I heard later that as they were driving through Arizona, a guy in oncoming traffic pulled out and around, so they had to slam on the brakes. The Mustang plowed through all her belongings and blew out the front of the trailer, wedging up against the tractor. Spent most of what they had saved up for a down payment on a house on the ordeal since they were too cheap to get extra insurance. My village has a lot of shops in the center with a number of flats above the shops. A new developer arrived, bought up all the properties and raised the rent ridiculously high on a 10-year contract for force all the small businesses and renters out. His idea was to redevelop the face of the village into a modern metro-type area. The problem was he's forced out every business. But no one signed up for his new leases. More than half the village shops are empty and it's an eyesore. All the businesses have gone to the big shopping centers. So no investors want any part of it. He's now ran out of money and can't build his Metro Douchy revamp anymore and is having to sell to recoup his lost rental earnings. Local Electoral District Association meeting was expected to be a largely pro forma renomination of the previous candidate, my boss. When a former candidate decides to throw his hat in the ring, starts giving this long diatribe about how much support he has locally, he lost his prior race by 3x the margin we lost by, and starts rambling. You know when someone starts talking faster instead of making a point? It was that. Boss texts me to say, "You can feel free to interrupt and move for a vote." I reply, "1 sec. I have a feeling he's gonna say something stupid." Right as he lets slip a racial slur against my boss. For context, boss was Indian. Previous candidate was Chinese. Both second generation. District didn't lean heavily in either direction. Needless to say, once he realized what had happened, he made the smart choice and withdrew. I'd asked our very macho and loud manager for a raise. And he went on a 10-minute rant about how kids these days thought there was money lying around just because we worked in a luxury dealership. Lots of condescending sweethearts and honeys thrown in for the fun little misogynist cherry on top. He got so loud and frothy I shut down a bit. But my face stayed blank. When he noticed I wasn't cowering or seemed to change my mind, he started offering a marginal raise. I reflexively lifted one eyebrow at the ridiculousness of it all. And he sighed. And went up significantly. Got a solid raise. A better position. And somehow his respect for the rest of my time working there. My ex-coworker was POS and he was using "I have a baby so I need certain shifts more." But that didn't matter if he randomly decided to get wasted on alcohol and white powder. He would call me in the middle of the night to cover his morning shift, etc., etc. And I would cover his shift. And yet, when I needed him to cover my shift, which I would ask him days, even weeks in advance, he would pull "I have a baby" card. Christmas season comes and I ask him if I can take 31st of December morning shift so I can spend New Year's evening with my boyfriend. Go somewhere. Celebrate, etc. He got almost mad because I asked. His words were, "No. No. I have a baby. It's his first New Year's Eve. I have to spend it with him and wife. Fine. Whatever." And then night of 30th comes. I was awake at 2 a.m. gaming or watching Netflix. I felt my phone vibrate and look who it is. My coworker who is wasted somewhere and needs his morning shift covered. I put my phone on Do Not Disturb and in my drawer. I didn't answer. Next morning I had 50 missed calls from him. Few from other coworker and 10-ish from my boss. He didn't show up for work. He got fired that day. Work environment became so much healthier. I worked at a large vape juice manufacturer printing labels for the bottles. We had a particular production manager who thought she was my boss. She wasn't. We were on the same level of the hierarchy, and thought her stuff was a priority to me. She could not understand that we had a whole process and knew exactly what needed to be printed in what order to fulfill all of our orders. Our boss told me to just do my best to work with her and get her what she requested so she'd shut up. She decided one day to order 150K of each label for 2 particular lines we had so she would never have to wait for labels again. The whole company knew that regulations were changing and requirements on labels were changing. I tried to explain this to her and that I didn't think this was a good plan. She insisted repeatedly. I finally said fuck it and started doing it while having my team do their best to keep up with our actual priorities. Stayed late. Got lots of overtime. When our boss finally clued into the order, I was 300K labels into 600K of the first line. When asked, I told him that he had told me to do what it takes to make her stop bitching, and that's what I was doing. He put an instant stop to it. She got written up and those labels were still on a shelf in the corner 3 years later when we shut down. Everybody was complaining about the sous chef. He was a mess and made everything harder. He did like 50% of his responsibilities and had been complaining that he wasn't getting enough support. I was passionately spearheading the mission to get him fired, but he did not know this about me. He confided in me that he was going to tell on his supervisor. Someone who works so hard, so much, and is a genuinely beloved boss. Knowing that almost everyone in the building was over him and that he was about to go blame it on someone everybody loves was so exciting. He was fired a few days after he told me his plan. Chef's kiss. Coworker messed up and rolled one of our ATVs we use for work. Nice enough guy, but not a good worker and very immature. He got called out for riding it too hard all the time. Meeting was had. We were told not to lift a tire off the ground when turning. Anyone that has ridden an ATV knows that sometimes, even at low speeds, the rear tire will lift. My boss was exaggerating for some of the dumber ones in the room. Later on, Coworker 2 turns around next to me on the ATV, at a reasonable speed, and the tire lifts a bit. Other coworker sees this and snitches on the radio. Just to try to get someone else in trouble besides himself. I offhandedly called him a snitch, off radio a few minutes later when I was near him. He then gets on the radio tower and throws a fit about what I said and has a meltdown. We all get called into the office. But beforehand, Coworker 2 and I agreed to just be chill. Apologize. And let Coworker 1 talk his way into getting fired. Boss understood what happened from the start. And as Coworker 1 got worked up about the situation all over again, my boss told the kid if he left the room mid-conversation, he was fired. Which he promptly did. I once worked for a project in a call center and we constantly had QA on our asses about call quality. They would review every call and send the report to you and your supervisor who would sign off on it, then send it back to QA. If you got 2 reports under 90%, there'd be a warning and you'd be fired after 4. Now, this was all done via email, so I'd save all my reports just in case. My first couple weeks, I got dinged with a warning, but everything after that I maintained at least 95% or above according to the reports I was getting. One week I noticed a few agents were getting let go. Agents I always thought were good. At the time, the project was looking for supervisors and these were the guys you would want. I found out they had all been hit with bad reports which led to the firings. Then one day HR calls me and lets me know I'm fired for several reports saying I scored insanely low scores. Just one problem. I had the report saying those were all over 90% and I told HR I had them. The HR representative asks me to forward all of them to review and I do so. A couple hours later I get another call from HR saying I'm being reassigned to another project with better pay. Turned out the QA was fudging the reports after the supervisors signed off on select agents because they had certain agents they were friends with and wanted them to get the management positions. Even worse, everyone in management knew and didn't care. The project got shut down and the fired agents were all brought back and placed in better paying projects like I was. I'm a detective. I know they're not enemies. But I was interviewing a person who had kicked their partner down the stairs and as a result gave them 2 spinal fractures. I had a written statement from the suspect's son saying they were on the stairs but didn't kick anyone. The suspect made up the most bullshit lie about not even being there and he had no idea why it had happened. I let them speak and speak and speak before presenting them with all the evidence I had for them being a liar. Job done. One of my favorite interviews from my whole career. Landlord raised rent on all the other units on my building, but he doesn't have my new email. 2 years and counting. Slipped through the cracks. Before I changed careers, I was working in an office and I had a team of 4 employees I was managing. My boss, who was incredibly dumb, wanted to see what grade 1 gave to my employees as part of their annual evaluation. I had 4 great employees who were working hard and well, and I could even show them some stuff past their level, telling them it could be useful experience if they wanted to later get a higher paying job at a higher level. Needless to say, their results were much higher than expected. Especially for 2 of them. So I gave 2 of them an A and the 2 others a B. My boss disagreed with me. Told me how their work has to be especially amazing to deserve such grades. She talks to me about the normal distribution and how there should be X amount of A, B and C. I let her go. I take back the sheets with their evaluation grades and everything I wrote about them. I ask her what exactly makes them not deserving. She rambles. I ask her what their day-to-day looks like. She rambles some more, getting a bit angry. I ask her what so-and-so last names are. She doesn't even know. I told her if she doesn't know anything about that. She has no clue how they are performing and therefore can't tell me to change it. I asked her what she'd do if the majority of the employees performed well. Will she give out D and E grades just to follow normal distribution? She tells me no. It would be ridiculous. I told her doing the same for A and B would be ridiculous too, and that's what she does. I told her if she wants, she can give me an E. But she won't change the evaluations of my employees, and as soon as I'd leave her office, I'd show them their grades so they know she's the one who changed them if it happened to change. Turns out, they kept their A and B. I got a C. I didn't give a shit. I left soon after and changed my career. Never looked back. What a fucking moron she was. Had gotten into an argument with a girl who my BF at the time cheated on me with. She was telling one of her group chats, in detail, about the hookup. Guess who was in the group chat? Me. 2 good ones. When we bought our house, we offered less than the asking price. The owner countered with halfway between our offer and theirs. And we said sure. When it came time to sign the paperwork, we saw that our original, lower offer was what their lawyer put in. We mentioned it to our lawyer and he said not to bring it up. Another time, my wife saw a new restaurant called Tilted Kilt and said it looked good. We should go. So I said yeah. She was a bit surprised when we walked in the front door. I have to keep this a little vague. I'm in jury trial. It's an assault case. My client is pleading self-defense. Nobody died but somebody got whooped. I can't get a bunch of the shit I want into evidence. No choice but to put client on the stand. I know this is high risk, high reward. I've prepped client. We go for it. I get basics out and let the prosecutor go at him. PA got in there and harangued him. Mostly about not calling the cops. PA then does rebuttal. Puts cop on the stand to explain how much they don't like him. Don't trust him. Wouldn't put anything past him or turn their back on him. Etc. Reputation evidence. In essence, I let it go past what I could object to. I was sitting there like, oh, this is too much, but go off, officer. It's a small community. They know each other. Basically wrote my closing for me. Why didn't he go to the police? The police told you why he didn't go to the police. When I was a seaman, my knuckle dragger BM3 would try to get me in trouble for every little thing. And I think I neglected to interrupt him several times. One time he was convinced he had caught me falsifying a weather report. Because I had put all zeros for everything. What's the problem? Everything was zeros. There were no clouds and no wind speed. He told me knows I was lying. Because the weather pack shows 360 for dead north. Not 000 like I wrote. And figured I hadn't actually done the rounds. I double-checked the instrument. And it turns out it reads 360 when the wind is actually blowing that way. When there is no wind, it reads 000 for the direction. Kind of like saying N.A. I decided not to bother explaining that to him. I don't know if he ever took his accusations up the chain of command or not. Because I never heard back on that issue. I was prosecuting in the local magistrate's court in the UK. The defendant had paid for some fancy smancy lawyer from London to come up to defend. The chair of the magistrates, who were all lay people, was a frail-looking senior lady and he tried to snowball her. He came perilously close to calling her dear while talking down to her. What we locals knew was that she was a terrifying harridan with a mind like a steel trap and a tongue like a razor, and she ate him alive. She tore apart his arguments. Lambasted him for bringing complex legal arguments to court without prior warning the clerk, and picked apart his understanding of the rules of evidence. Never saw him again. I was on a jury hearing a drug possession with intent to sell case. The prosecution had the narcotics detective on direct to establish the defendant's M.O. The defendant would sit in his car in front of his house. A customer would pull up and request product. The defendant would take the cash, go into his house where his grandmother, yes, grandmother, would exchange cash for product. And defendant would go back outside to deliver product. Apparently, defendant felt that since he never directly exchanged money for drugs, he was safe from prosecution. But that's a matter for IAM very smart at another time. Anyway, the narc detectives bought products several times to build an airtight case. Then returned days later with a bunch of squads and arrested everyone. The defendant took the stand while his attorney attempted to establish a simple case of mistaken identity on the part of the detectives. Addy. So in your neighborhood, is it common for young men your age to dress similarly and sit in or hang around their cars at the curb most every evening? Defendant. Number. Addy. Splutters. What I meant was. Prosecution. Objection. Asked and answered. Judge. Sustained. It wasn't the answer you wanted. But it was an answer. Move on. Guilty on all counts. Roll credits. Stepdad explaining to the cops why he hated my guts and wanted to fight me. Mother starts to defend me, but it was all incriminating evidence, so I stopped her. I went to work on a large government installation in a remote area. A woman I had never met filed a sexual harassment complaint against me. The fictitious event took place a year before I showed up there, and I had been 1,200 miles, 1931 km, away. I was making a delivery in the downtown area of small city. I worked for an event rental service, tents, tables, chairs, that kind of stuff. We made deliveries using large box trucks with hydraulic lift gates on the back. For those who don't know, a liftgate is a heavy metal mini elevator that fits underneath the back bumper of large trucks and folds out a few feet behind the truck whenever you need to use it. Finding parking downtown in a big truck can already be a huge inconvenience. But we found a spot right outside of the venue we were delivering to. It was a very busy street. So that was crazy lucky. We didn't have a ton of space to work with. But we had enough room to fold out the liftgate behind the truck. And a bit of ground to work with behind that. I had 2 other people working with me. One would stay up in the truck and I and another would take turns running the gate and carrying the stuff inside. This is when an older woman in a nice BMW SUV decided that she was going to parallel park right behind us and take the little working space behind the truck that we had. Sure, it's annoying and inconsiderate. But hey, it's a city and people need to park. I get it. Now, our guy up in the truck was readying the next load of stuff to come down to the ground. So the lift gate was lifted all the way up, about 5 feet in the air. The lady in the SUV backs up, cuts her wheel, and slices the absolute shit out her Beamer right into our steel lift gate. She finished the park job. But her SUV is cosmetically fucked. The passenger fender, headlight area is annihilated. And naturally our big hunk of steel is unscathed. She gets out and starts screaming at us that it's somehow our fault. And this is where nature takes its course. She lays into all 3 of us for a solid 2 or 3 minutes and eventually loses a little steam. I give her a chance and tell her that she's fighting a losing battle and that we aren't at fault. Of course she immediately fires back up like a lunatic and calls the cops. I shrug at her. And we complete the rest of our delivery. And the cops show up a few minutes later. When they pull this lady full 180s. Oh officers. I'm so glad you're here, that's them over there. No joke. Literally pointing. The cops ask what's going on. And we don't even have to open our mouths. This lady tells the whole story about how she crunched her BMW into our parked truck. The cops look over to me. And I just give them an exhausted head shake. Well ma'am. The cops explain that she is at fault and the cherry on top is the citation she received for running into us. In high school, this group of girls who started this huge beef against me over nothing. They posted about it on their Snapchat. Phoned me up. Texted me. So by copying that stuff for once I had hard evidence against them when I brought it to the school. They regretted that relieved face. Please proceed. Governor Romney. While I was doing squad leader training after basic, we were doing live fire exercises with machine guns, the MG-240 specifically. We took turns being squad leaders, while the others stood in as grunts. It was basically form up, go up a hill, get into position, give orders, shoot targets and retreat back to the staging area. Pretty basic stuff. One stipulation was that everyone was to bring their rifles at all times since the MG might jam or whatever. When it was my turn to be squad leader, I reminded everyone to bring their rifles. But of course the 2 most gung-ho Rambo types refused, citing it unnecessary. I was about to start chewing them out. But I noticed that the guy reloading the ammo belts was doing it wrong. You have to really try. But you can insert the cartridge backwards. I also noticed one of the officers who was overseeing the exercise eavesdropping from behind a tree. So I let them go without their rifles. The MG of course wouldn't fire when they got to the firing line. So all they could do was just lay there. I was chewed out for letting them get away with not bringing their rifles, which I knew would happen. But the verbal ass whooping the other guys got was of epic proportions. Both of them actually turned out all right in the end. Maybe this was a bit of a teaching moment. When my ex decided to try to snatch our kid from his mother's care, while I was at work. After I filed for divorce. He was intoxicated, failed a sobriety check, and I was granted emergency custody. It was probably one of the single worst decisions that set him up to be in the position he's in now. I was playing lacrosse and the guy on the other team got all turned around on the face-off and ran back and scored a shot on his own goal. I had a creature that made it so none of my opponent's creatures could use their activated abilities. My opponent then played an enchantment that made all of his lands creatures. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to drop a like. If you would like to see more content like this in the future, subscribe and turn on notifications to be notified about future videos. Now check out one of these interesting videos.